I should be allowed to use that phrase without you calling me anti-Semitic. Alan, it actually depends if people are actually pulling strings, and I do think Netanyahu's been doing that. Let me bring in Joe Kent. I mean, Joe Kent, this is one of the more unsavory. Well, I'll use the term I feel is appropriate. Joe Kent, I mean, this idea that you can't use certain phrases, terms.
And I'll criticize you for it. You can say what you want, and I can say what I want.
Oh no, Alan Dershowitz might criticize Piers Morgan for using the phrase pulling the strings. What is he gonna do? By the way, Alan Dershowitz made like this big deal and huge announcement about how he's no longer a registered Democrat because Democrats aren't friendly enough to Israel. He's gonna try to help the Republicans now. Democrats are like, thank you for that.
It's kind of crazy that this guy hasn't been completely and wholly discredited at this point. I get that Piers is putting on an entertainment product to a certain extent, as much as he's delivering the news to people. But the Dersh is just he's been so thoroughly discredited, it's kind of laughable.
Dersh can't find the camera if his life depended on it. Okay, he's always looking off to the side. It's so entertaining. Okay, so the whole point of this gathering on Piers Morgan Uncensored was to have Alan Dershowitz, a notorious Epstein lawyer, defense attorney, debating Joe Kent, who stepped down from the Trump administration. He is now the former director of national counterterrorism. And look, I felt Joe Kent is very mild-mannered, and I'm just gonna keep it real with you guys. At the end of the day, he's not anti-Israel, right? Like he still says things that are like semi-supportive of Israel. And so I think that puts him at a disadvantage in a debate like this because Alan Dershowitz is clearly a zealot in favor of Israel. However, much of the time, Pierce was actually debating Dershowitz. But let's actually begin with Dershowitz's pretty insane claim that the majority of Americans are just anti-Semitic.
Well, popular support for Israel is plummeting in the US, a fact borne out by poll after poll. More Americans now sympathize with the Palestinians than they do with Israelis for the first time in history, and support is falling across all age groups and all political affiliations.
You mentioned, by the way, that so many Americans are pro-Palestinian. Let's be very clear. Very few people really are pro-Palestinian. They're anti-Israel. If they were pro-Palestinian, they would also be supporting the Kurds, the Uyghurs. They would be supporting the Sudanese. They would be supporting the Ukrainians. You don't have demonstrations on university campuses in favor of these other oppressed groups, only for the Palestinians, not because of who they are, but because of who allegedly oppresses them, namely the nation state of the Jewish people. So it's another manifestation of the increasing worldwide anti-Semitism, and I'm going to fight against that.
You know, considering the fact that Americans had to fork over literally hundreds of billions of dollars for Ukraine's defense against Russia, I would say that it is literally one of the craziest things to claim that Americans didn't care about the Ukrainians, that they didn't, give a damn about that. I mean, the problem with Israel is that Israel is the bad guy. I know it's hard for him to understand that, but they're the bad ones in this whole scenario. But maybe my perspective is off. What do you think, Waz?
I mean, no, your perspective isn't off. First of all, to address Ukraine, the way that he's so wrong is just insane and laughable. Like, do people not remember the Ukrainian flags everywhere when that war first started? Like everywhere, these flags were. These are not Ukrainians like in solidarity with their countrymen. It's like everyday Americans, liberals, just in solidarity with Ukraine. And what I would say to him about the Uyghurs or the Kurds or the Sudanese is that America isn't directly implicated in aiding and abetting their oppression.
And Americans did speak out against that.
Yes.
But again, the reason why it didn't blow up the way protests against Israel blew up is because our government is joined at the hip with Israel. So we're not just implicated, we're not just complicit, we are funding the atrocities. We are very much part of carrying out the atrocities. Sorry to interrupt you, continue.
No, but that's a huge difference, right? Like even with the Sudan thing, you see people, or at least I do, maybe I just know people were just too freaking woke for their own good, right? But not in this case, but you know what I mean? People saying that, yo, the UAE needs to be held accountable for what's happening in Sudan. The UAE is a disgusting entity for their part in what's going on in Sudan. Like this idea that people they're just picking on the Jews. They're just picking on the Jews. It's like, guys, like, nobody gets deported because they dissed the Saudi government or the Emirati government. Nobody gets, kicked out of school. Nobody gets denied employment. Nobody has these things happen to them because they diss any other foreign nation's actions.
Exactly.
There's only one foreign nation who is privileged in that way. Like if you want, like he had issues with Piers Morgan say strings are being pulled. I'm like, what do you call that?
Okay, we're gonna get to that. Hold, because that whole exchange was just out of control. But I want everyone to really absorb the fact that Alan Dershowitz just called the majority of Americans Jew haters. That's what he did. No. So aside from smearing Americans and admitting that the Israelis have been oppressing Palestinians, I mean, he said allegedly, but come on. Dershowitz made sure to engage in the language policing that was just referenced. So buckle up for this.
One of the reasons I think that Israel's been getting increasingly unpopular is because anyone that dares to criticize the Israeli government, and I stand by my suggestion that Benjamin Netanyahu has been pulling some strings with Trump because he managed to persuade the fourth American president. Well, let me finish my point. And I think I should be allowed to use that phrase. I should be allowed to use that phrase without you calling me anti-Semitic.
I don't think so.
I think you know I'm not anti-Semitic.
No, I'm not. Hey, by the way, I would never call you anti-Semitic. You're a friend of the Jews. You're a friend of Israel. What I'm telling you is something historical, that the phrase pulling the strings is a trope and it shouldn't be used. And I wish you would use other terms. Put pressure, that's fine. Pulling the strings, having a puppet, that should not be permitted. I look, I like you very much and I support you all the time, but I criticize you for using that term. Please don't use that term. It's historic.
No, it depends
reminds
if people are actually,
too much.
It depends if
what other people who have different motives would say.
Alan, it actually depends if people are actually pulling strings. And I do think Netanyahu's been doing that.
I can't tell you how much language policing gets under my skin because I think it's used as a distraction tactic. So you're not focusing on the substance of an argument that actually matters. And instead you're just talking about semantics and what's offensive and what isn't offensive in terms of word usage. Recently I kind of got into it with a woman who was triggered because I said undocumented immigrants instead of illegal aliens. She kept saying illegal aliens, and like I didn't get on her case about it because it's like, okay, whatever. I want to focus on the substance. But then she kept interrupting me because she's like, is it undocumented or illegal? And it's like, shut. Anyway, and Pierce stayed calmer than I probably would have in that situation. But like, I'm sorry, just because you have determined or you have declared that a certain phrase or word is a trope doesn't mean that the statement that Piers Morgan is making is untrue.
Yeah, but at a certain point, I feel sorry for these guys because that rhetorical trick has worked for so long. It's worked for decades in terms of policing the exact parameters of the discourse. Like they've been able to basically dictate how you talk about Israel, like at every single turn until very, very recently. So, that whole, when they're like, you only have a problem with the one Jewish state, or they use these tricks that they've always used to be like any criticism of a freaking government, a state, a regime. But like, we're not even talking about Israelis. We're talking about the Israeli government and the actions that it's carried out and they say it's on behalf of their citizens. Like, we're talking about a state. Like, I don't agree with what Donald Trump is doing in Iran, him and his regime, what the American state is doing. That does not make me anti-American. I love Anna, she's an American. I love myself, I'm an American. Like, it just doesn't compute at all. It makes no sense.
It makes no sense. I've been critical of the Armenian government lately. Am I an Armenian hater, or do I hate Armenia? No, but I don't agree with some of the decisions that the Armenian government has been making, namely their thirst in making business ties with Israel. Are you guys high? Are you guys high? Israel armed Azerbaijan to ethnically cleanse Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh. What are you doing? But anyway, we're not talking about Armenia right now. By the way, tomorrow is the day that Armenians mourn the Armenian genocide. April 24th, every year, Armenians mourn the Armenian genocide. And yeah, I mean, Azerbaijan carrying out atrocities against Armenians with Israeli weapons, something that, the Armenian government should be thinking about as it's trying to forge business relationships with Israel. Anyway, moving on. So Dershowitz seems to take issue with reality, which he totally denies. He denies that Israel has outsized influence over the United States. And honestly, at this point, I don't know how anyone can say that with a straight face, but Dershowitz certainly tries. So what's his counter argument to the fact that Israel has an outsized influence on the US? Take a look.
It's the oldest anti-Semitic trope in history, that Israel's pulling, that the Jews are pulling the strings. Nobody tells Trump what to do. Trump decides what to do. What Israel said and what the United States together said is, we have intelligence that all these people are meeting in the same place, so this is the time to do it. But the United States and Donald Trump did not start a war based on Israel's interest. They started a war based on American interests.
So what I witnessed over the last year was official engagements from members of Benjamin Netanyahu's government, the Israeli government, come and have official engagements with members of our government and say things like, Iran can't have any enrichment. The policy has to be zero enrichment, when in fact, President Trump had just said the policy was no nuclear weapon. And you'll see President Trump echo that in his talking points now. And the former Supreme Leader, before we killed him, agreed with that. And that got both President Trump and the Supreme Leader to the negotiating table. And so for almost a year, we saw constructive negotiations between us and the Iranian government. This was a direct threat to the Israelis. The Israelis told us this much. The Mossad director, David Barnea, specifically said that their goal was regime change in Iran.
So this is the moment where I think Joe Kent's contribution to the conversation was really, really important, because what you'll hear over and over again from Israel's defenders is that no, Israel does not have an outsized influence on our government. And here you have Joe Kent, who until like yesterday was part of the federal government under the Trump administration and saw firsthand what that outsized influence looks like. And so we're gonna go to the second half of what he had to say, because I thought it was important for the audience to hear it. But before we do, your thoughts, Was?
Again, like just reality has to set in at some point when you consider, our partners out in East Asia, like Japan and South Korea, like vital partners and allies economically. When you talk about like US economic interests, which we claim to care about more than anything, Japan and South Korea are number one and number two up there, and you could bunch in Taiwan in terms of our economic interests. We're literally taking weapons that they could be using in potential their defense against China, who we claim is the next big boogeyman, so that we could do military adventurism out in Iran, a country again that poses no threat to us in a region of the world that we have no vital economic interests. We have oil here in America. We're net exporters. We don't need their stuff anymore. And so this idea that it's not, and part of it is like the old geriatric sort of leadership structure in America. These guys do have a certain attachment to the Middle East on their own. And yes, Israel is and their leaders play on that prior attachment, and they're biased towards antagonism towards Iran. Of course, that matters, but to say that Israel plays no part in this is absolutely nuts when Iran is a threat to them, not us.
Right. And Iran is a threat to them if they encroach on their neighbor's territory.
Yeah.
Right. It's not like Iran is like, oh, it's Tuesday, 5 p.m. Let's attack Israel. No, that's not what happens. Okay. But Israel wants to go unchallenged as it seeks to expand its borders. And, another way that we're screwing over our allies, our Asian allies, right? Japan, South Korea, is this war has increased oil prices. Mm-hmm. And they are struggling way more than we are.
They don't have oil over there.
Exactly. Yeah. It's pretty bad.
It's laughable to just the notion. And again, and our friend Danny Bessner, like he points it out. There's several spokes on the wheel. It's not just Israel and the Israel lobby. There's just a institutional memory when it comes to the Iranians and the guys that they helped out during the Iraq War, the hostages. I know with Trump, like the memory of the hostages and that humiliation looms quite large, which, okay, we're allowed to have that institutional memory, but the Iranians are supposed to forget about the Iran-Iraq war where we gave Saddam the weapons and the go-ahead, gave him chemical weapons to use against Iranians. Like they're supposed to just be like, no, we love the US.
No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. You want to talk about humiliation? Israel humiliates us every single day. You want to talk about humiliation when the president of the United States is bent over, ready to take it from Israel? Every day, every day. Doesn't even need lube, ready for it. That's humiliation. That's humiliation. Okay, let's go to the last video. This is where I think Joe Kent did a really good job discussing the clear differences between US and Israeli objectives as it pertains to the war in Iran.
Their goal was regime change in Iran. They weren't very shy about that whatsoever, and so they used their access through official channels to circumvent the intelligence community. Because anytime that the Israelis said the Iranians are 2 weeks away from a nuclear weapon, they're making a nuclear weapon, the U.S. intelligence community, we would go and we would do our due diligence. We would check that, and we would find that the Iranian internal prohibition on developing a nuclear weapon was still holding. As a matter of fact, the Iranians were also withholding their proxies from attacking us as well. That's what the U.S. intelligence community agreed on. DNI Gabbard testified to that publicly twice in front of Congress. The Israelis, though, used their influence to circumvent the intelligence channels. And then they also had their surrogates within the media come and echo to President Trump via Fox News, the Wall Street Journal, the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, and say, hey, the red line is zero enrichment. And they said it enough, they made it repetitive enough through multiple avenues that President Trump was led to believe that his red line has to be zero enrichment.
So two things are revealed in what Joe Kent said there. Number one, again, the outsized influence of the Israeli government on our government and on our foreign policy. And number two, the United States and Israel do not share the same objectives. They just don't. And so
we don't have the same problems.
We don't. It's just the truth. It's just the truth. Judaism has nothing to do with this at all, right? It doesn't enter into this equation at all. This is not about identity. This is about government. This is about questions of war and peace. This is a question about power. And Israel looks at, the former wealth of the United States, its military might, and thinks we got to use that to our advantage, even if it's at the detriment of the American people. Who cares about the American people, right? But what's so embarrassing, just to go back to that question of humiliation, is that our government has been whorish enough to be bought and manipulated by a foreign country to carry out actions in foreign policy that it does not benefit the American people. In fact, works against the best interests of the American people. That's the humiliation. Final word from us.
And people gotta understand that Israel needs us to, one, be in conflict with Iran, but Iran to be just isolated on the world stage so that they're weakened and can't have a say in what goes down in the region, right? Like if Israel was just cool with like, their borders staying as they are, and I'm not talking about, them encroaching into Lebanon and all this other stuff, but to just remain as it was, and Iran normalizes relationships with the US and the Gulf states, and we basically maintain an orderly peace. That would mean if they normalize relationships with America, the Iranians, that would mean when Israel, acted out in the region, Iran could have a say, and America would be like, yo, like they kind of have a point. We're boys with them now. Like they don't want that. They can't have that because, like all things being equal, if they didn't have the big brother America to help them out, they would be a very minor player within the region. They couldn't just unilaterally decide to expand borders and bomb hospitals and children at school and all of that stuff, because there's a real actual regional power that would be a check on their belligerents, and they just can't abide by that. And so they need this war between us and Iran.
And for anyone who's under the impression that there's no way that Israel or the United States can have diplomatic ties with Iran, given their religious extremism, look up Wahhabism in Saudi Arabia, because that's a little more extreme than what's practiced by the IRGC.
I mean,
and by the way, we have relations with Saudi Arabia, right? It's the whole religious extremism angle. That argument is BS.
Anna, we fixed our relationship with Japan, who we went to World War II against and dropped 2 atomic bombs against.
I know, yeah.
And this idea that neighbors can't, I'm like, I don't know, France and England and Germany figured it out. Why can't y'all? It seems pretty simple to me. Like, but we have to believe that these are just different, more evil, more sinister brands of human beings that could possibly behave rationally and come on one accord with us. It doesn't make any sense. Like our own human history shows us that there's another way.
I 100% agree with you.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.